So on April the 5th, 1952, at a few minutes before 9 o'clock, I killed Aunt. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I reckon there's another thing or two I ought to tell you first. And I will tell you. In fact, I want to tell you. I won't leave you to go figuring things out on your own. I know a lot of people when they tell stories, every time they reach a high point, they start to go haywire. They start running their words together and babbling about flashing stars sinking into deep, dreamless seas. And you can't figure out whether the hero is laying his girl or a cornerstone. I know a lot of people eat that kind of crap up, but the way I see it is the guy telling the story is just too goddamn lazy to do his job. And I'm not lazy. Whatever else you want to call me, I am not lazy. I will tell you everything. I just want to get it in the right order. That evening I ate dinner and went upstairs and stretched out on the bed for a while, letting my food settle, and lie there smoking till about 8 o'clock. Then I went downstairs, closed all the blinds, turned the pantry light on, and adjusted the door back and forth till I had the light just how I wanted it. And the evening paper was spread out on the kitchen table. I slid a butcher knife up under it, and it was time. I heard her coming across the back porch. She fumbled around with the back door for a while, getting it closed behind her, and then she saw me standing there, not saying anything because I'd forgotten why. And I was trying to remember when she dropped her 2 traveling cases on the floor and give one of them a kick.
Well, I swear, Lou Ford, would it ever occur to you to give me any help? I mean, here you stand on your own wedding night of all things, and you're not even ready yet. You're always talking about how slow I am, and I don't say another word, Amy. Just don't. Well, I'm sorry, darling. I didn't mean to. But I do want to tell you how much I...
Sure, I said. You want to pour your little heart out to me, don't you? And I hit her in the guts as hard as I could, and my fist went back against the spine, and the flesh closed around it to the wrist, and I jerked back. I had to jerk. And then she fell forward from the waist like she was hinged, and her hat fell off, and her head went down and touched the floor, and then she toppled over completely like a little kid doing a somersault. And she lay there on her back, and her eyes were bulging, and she was kind of shaking and jerking. And there was a funny sound like she was trying to laugh, and then I saw a puddle spread out under her. I sat down and tried to read the paper for a while, but the light wasn't any too good. Not good enough to read by, anyway. And it looked like she couldn't lie still. Once I felt something touch my boot, and I looked down, and her fingers was going back and forth across the toe of my boot, and for some reason I was afraid to move. And then they went up along the ankle, and then they went all the way up and got clutched down inside. I stood up and tried to get loose. Hell, I drug her 2 or 3 feet before I could break away. And the fingers kept moving back and forth, and finally they got a hold of her purse and drug it down inside her skirt. Well, that was okay. I mean, it looked better to have her holding on to her purse anyway, wouldn't it? I had to grin a little, though, you know. That'd been so much like Amy, to clutch hold of her purse like that. She'd always been so tight. But she had to be. Well, the Stantons was one of the best families in town. But with both her folks ailing for years, they didn't have much aside from their home. So she had to be that way. That's all any of us ever are, is who we have to be. I guess it hadn't really been too funny when I kidded her deadpan and acted so surprised when she got mad. I guess that stuff she brought for me to eat when I was sick wasn't really crap. It was as good as she knew how to fix. I guess that old dog of theirs didn't really have to chase horses unless he wanted to exercise. I guess it... Why didn't he come? She hadn't had a real breath now in almost 30 minutes, and it was hard as hell on her. I know how hard it was, because I held my own breath for a while, because we'd always done things together, and he came. I heard him tugging at the screen door. I latched it so I couldn't just walk right in, and I gave her 2 hard kicks in the head, and I knew there wouldn't be any doubt about her. I went up and let him in. "You got the money, bud?" "Yeah, it's back in the kitchen." He followed me back. He stayed right on my heels. He didn't want me to get too far ahead of him. And when we stepped through the kitchen door, he was watching me instead of anything else. And I stepped aside real quick, and he almost stepped on her. I believe his foot did touch her stomach for a minute. And he looked down at her like his eyes were steel and she was a magnet. And he was trying to tug him loose. And finally he got him off of her, and he looked over at me, and his lips shook like he'd been playing a juice harp. He said, it was a hell of a funny sound. He sounded like a siren with a slippy chain that can't quite get started. He looked funny as hell too. You ever see one of those 2-bit jazz singers trying to put something across with their bodies they haven't got the voice to do? They kind of lean back a little bit, and then they hang their heads forward and hold their arms up about even with their ribs, and then they kind of go limp and just sort of swing and wobble on their hips. Well, that's the way he looked, and he kept making that funny damn sound the whole time. I laughed and laughed. I couldn't help it. He looked and sounded so damn funny. Then I stopped laughing when I'd remembered what he'd done. "You son of a bitch, I was going to marry that poor little girl, and she caught you going through the house, and you tried to..." Well, I stopped because he hadn't done it all. But he could have. The son of a bitch could have. He could have done it just as easy as not. But he was just like everyone else. Too nice and pretentious to do anything really hard. But he'd stand back and crack that old whip over me, keep moving around me every way I turned so I couldn't get away no matter what I did. And it was always, "Now, don't you do nothing, bud," but they kept cracking that old whip the whole time they were saying it. And he'd done it all right. And I wasn't gonna take the blame. I could be just as tricky and pretentious as he could. I was blind, angry as hell seeing him like that. Shocked, shivering, doing that damn screwy dance. Hell, he hadn't had to watch her shaking and jerking on the floor and her hands moving around. What right did he have to act that way? I was the one that should have been acting like that. But it was his right, and I had to hold it and do all the dirty work. I was mad as hell. I snatched up the knife and made for him. And my foot slipped where she'd been lying, and I went sprawling over backwards. Hell, I almost knocked him down if he hadn't moved out of the way. And I was laid out flat, helpless, without any weapon or nothing. I couldn't move the finger for maybe a minute. And I could have maybe rolled over a little and put my arms around her, and we'd have been together again like always. But do you think he'd do it? Do you think he'd pick up that knife and use it? Just a little thing like that wouldn't have been a bit of trouble at all. Hell no. Oh, God, Oh, Jesus Christ and Mary and all the saints, hell no! All he could do was beat it, just like they always did. I snatched up the knife and took off after the heartless son of a bitch.